Hello, I'm Thomas Cleveland, the Director of Academic Programs at the Jack Miller Center, and welcome to our webinar on how to write and publish a book as a junior scholar. I'm joined today by four associates or Jack Miller Center fellows and who have published books as junior scholars or in the midst of publishing books. And we're going to be talking today about how you go about doing that. And I hope it's an edifying discussion. So let me say hello to my friends. First, we've got Luke Sheahan, who is Assistant Professor of Political Science at Duquesne University and author of Why Associations Matter, the Case for First Amendment Pluralism. We also have Robinson Woodward-Burns, who's Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science at Howard University and author of Hidden Laws, How State Constitutions Stabilize American Politics. We've got Natasha Piano, Harper Schmidt Fellow and Collegiate Assistant Professor in the Social Sciences at University of Chicago. She's the co-editor of Florentine Political Writings from Petrarch to Machiavelli, and she's working on a manuscript on democratic elitism. We also have Greg Collins, who helped organize this and for which we're very thankful, who is the lecturer in the program on ethics, politics, and economics at Yale University and author of Commerce and Manners in Edmund Burke's Political Economy. So everyone say hello if you've got a moment. So just a little bit about the format. We're just going to be asking them some questions. I would highly encourage you to use the Q&A feature. If you're on a PC or a Mac, it should be at the bottom of your screen, and you can send in a question and I can relay those questions to our panelists and they can respond to them. So it'll be fun and interactive. So again, I'll encourage you to go ahead and do that. So let's just get started. Greg, I'm going to just open up a question and others feel free to join in. I just want to begin at the beginning. How did you settle on a book topic, or how ought one to settle on a book topic? And how can you establish a consistent research and writing schedule?
Great, okay. Thank you, Tom, and thank you to JMC for this opportunity. As a graduate student myself, I wish I had participated or I'd listened to some of these panels. So hopefully this is a service to everyone who is listening. In terms of deciding on a book topic, naturally, it would flow from your dissertation topic, which in my case was the political economy of Edmund Burke. When you focus on the book topic, generally you want it to be, so you don't have to do more legwork. It has to have some connection to your dissertation topic. But from my experience, editors are looking for a theme that is, timely, relevant. Sometimes they'll use the word urgent, although not, to be fair, not any of these books are not urgent in the sense that if you don't read them, people start dying. But at the very least, they have to be relevant for your particular discipline. And it's even better if they're broader applications to contemporary public policy debates. Because most people reading your book are not experts in the field, but they do have some general sense of contemporary public affairs. So those are, I think, the first consideration, collection of considerations to take into account when deciding on the book topic. In addition, the book topic, from my experiences, clear enough of a narrative to the book topic. And I hesitate to use the word narrative because I think it's overused, but these books are not simply going to be read, obviously, by the three scholars in your particular discipline, by hopefully a broader academic audience, and hopefully even beyond that. So there has to be some thematic consistency of your topic that can make itself into a coherent argument. And therefore, when you transition from a dissertation to a book, some of the common areas to modify or cut out, some of us may have heard of these before, is to cut down the literature review, limit the footnotes, limit the extended analyses of those footnotes. And then also the general spirit of a book narrative driven by a book topic should be energetic, happy, optimistic. You're trying to persuade someone of something, as opposed to the dissertation, which all of us have gone through, or not going through right now, which is more defensive, systematic, stolid, dry. That spirit is different from a book manuscript itself, and editors are looking for that sort of energy of spirit in that book manuscript that I think is distinct from a traditional dissertation. And then when you start writing, when you decide on a topic and start writing the book, make sure at the very least you have a general, you don't need to have a specific sense, but have a general sense of the structure of the trajectory of your argument. Think carefully about the chapter development, think carefully about the general argument, even if it's not specific, because I think for me, it was helpful. I don't know how others feel on the panel, but for me, it was helpful to consistently go back to that general chapter outline that you formulate at the beginning and that general key argument, key paragraph at the beginning, and consistently refer your research and analysis back to those guiding themes when you start writing. In terms of how to establish a consistent writing schedule, some of this, they're not secrets, but it's so important to emphasize these ideas. One, I think first and foremost, more important than anything else for me at the very least, was self-discipline and focus. Eliminate distractions, eliminate outside noise, eliminate outside responsibilities for at least a chunk of time each day, as much as you can. It's amazing how much one can get done if you do something day after day, even for a couple hours each day. For me, I was more alert, and this is not this is not uncommon for other people. I was more alert writing, researching in the mornings, right after you wake up, and a cup of coffee and breakfast, as opposed to the afternoons. And so I tried to structure my time by confronting the most intellectually demanding material in the morning, and then reserving the less demanding material for the afternoon. But people have their different methods of doing so. In terms of tracking progress, one of the biggest psychological struggles for me in academia in general is that there's no definable, tangible product that you can point to at the end of each day and say you accomplished this, you accomplished that, as opposed to some other jobs. So psychologically for me, it was helpful at the end of each day just to make a mental note or jot down what you actually did accomplish, whether it was drawing out a key theme, analyzing a key speech, a key text, and making sure you yourself are aware of that, the general progression and that you're engaging in throughout writing the book manuscript. Some people have a writing goal. I'll write X number of words per day, X number of pages per day. I didn't do that, but I mean, different people have different ways of tracking success. But at the very least for me, reviewing what I researched and wrote at the end of each day, even just in my head, helped me convey to my, communicate to myself that I was making progress in the manuscript. A couple other key pieces of advice I would impart. One, and I was a victim of this, be careful about going down rabbit holes in your research and writing, which is why for me, it was just so essential to keep referring back to the central theme, the central, the chapter outline that you formulate at the beginning. Because looking back, I just spent hours researching these things that weren't central to my argument, weren't central to the research, and that I ended up cutting a lot of it or stuffing it in a long footnote. I could have used my time more efficiently and productively if I didn't go down those rabbit holes. So make sure you are clear yourself with your argument and the relevant research necessary to build up your argument. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, if anyone wants to follow up on this theme, you should, you could say what he was absolutely wrong about. Or...
I'll say a few words on this. I actually received advice from another political theorist early on in my career about productivity schedules and how best to go about them, because of course it probably is the best to work consistently every day. But what I learned from Julie Rose was that you have to figure out what works for you and then not feel guilty about it. So some people like to work, as Greg said, in the mornings, and that was the right time. That was the right time for him, and that's great. And obviously it was very, very productive. But some people go for weeks without working and then have to ramp up and then have long spurts of productivity, and then they're just so depleted that they can't look at it anymore. And that actually works well for a lot of people too. So as opposed to trying to maintain some kind of ideal schedule about what seems to be model of productive behavior. Just figure out what works for you. If you're a ramper-upper, then go ahead, do that. And don't feel guilty about it, because that usually takes more time and eats into the productivity that you would otherwise have. That's always been helpful advice for me, as I am a ramper-upper, not necessarily a consistent, diligent morning from 7 to noon person, but I do end up getting in my writing in these long month or 2 or 3 month spurts of productivity, and then I take longer breaks. So
Great. I'm going to move forward in the process just to make sure we cover everything, but we should feel free to return to any question if we judge it best. So Luke, I was going to ask you, if supposing that you've actually written something, or you're well on the way to completing something, how you go about reaching out to book publishers to gauge interest in the manuscript, and what the editing process, supposing you've secured some sort of deal, looks like.
All right, so you have a manuscript or something close to it. Now what do you do? So what you want to do is you want to write a book proposal. There's plenty of guidelines out there on how to do that. For a new first-time author, what you're going to do is you're going to write a manuscript or a document. It's about 4 pages long. It's going to have 4 sections. First is a description of the book, which is exactly what it sounds like. Second is chapter summaries, also what it sounds like. And then the third section is audience and marketing. So your publisher wants to know if anyone is going to be interested in what you wrote about. So which scholars are writing on these sorts of things and would be interested in it? So how does it compare to other scholars' work in your field? Is there any popular appeal? So you might be writing on a narrow academic topic, but you might be writing on something that's of general interest. So like Greg said, something that the general public thinks is urgent in the present time for some reason. For some reason, your book touches on something that might have a broader readership than just the handful of scholars who write on the same topic as you. And so you want to talk about that in this section. You want to give the publisher a sense for which journals would be interested in reviewing the book. So they're going to want to send out review copies. They're going to want to get those book reviews published in those journals, so that a number of scholars, hopefully dozens, maybe even hundreds, will purchase books off of Amazon or from the publisher and add them to their libraries. Of course, you want those scholars to be citing them, to know about them, be referencing them in their work. So you have to make the case for why there is an audience for your book and what sort of marketing in an academic context the publisher could engage in. And you want to do the front loading on that work to tell them where they can send the books, what sort of scholars are going to be interested in it, and even some broader popular outlets that might be interested in the book as well. And then finally, you want to have a section on suggested reviewers. So what scholars would be knowledgeable enough about your topic that if the publisher were to send your manuscript to them, they'd be able to give it a critical analysis, hopefully positive, but also critical. They're not just a friend of yours. They're not your mentor or thesis advisor. They're not your undergraduate mentor. It's somebody else that you may know, or at least be familiar with their work enough to know that they'll be able to judge accurately your book manuscript. And so they should have a publishing record that indicates that. They've published on similar things. They're prominent enough that your editor would think it's a good idea to send to them. And you get the chance to suggest those people to them. Now, where to send your book proposal? You're looking for 2 things: prestige of the outlet and fit of the book. So of course, there are a number of journal articles that gauge prestige in your field. So you should look at those lists, and you want to send your proposal probably to the top 10. Start with the top 10, but also you want to be thinking about fit. So what publishers publish good books on your topic specifically? So I published my book with the University Press of Kansas, which is a great press in constitutional law and American political thought. And my book is on American constitutionalism and American political thought. And I said that in my cover letter and in my proposal. Lo and behold, it was accepted. So you want to look for good fit. And then you make the case in your proposal for why your book fits at that press. So this means looking at book series. Maybe there's a book series there on, say, the First Amendment. Your manuscript is on the First Amendment, and it would make a great deal of sense for this publisher to put your book in that book series. You want to make the case. This is always what your job is. The editor probably does not have a PhD in your field, probably isn't an expert in your field. They almost always are not. So you have to make the case to them for why they should be interested in your book. So that's the point of the cover letter and the proposal. You might have something really good to say, and an expert in your field would know it, but the editor's not going to know it. You have to make the case to the editor for why your book is so important and why it fits at that press. That means every cover letter is going to be different for each publisher or potential publisher. And your proposal may even have to be changed in some parts to fit in specifically with the publisher you're sending it to. So you'll send out, say, 10 proposals at a time with 10 different cover letters addressed to 10 different editors at 10 different publishers. And those proposals may have to be tweaked as well. So this is a long process. Now your editor's interested. And he says, okay, send me the manuscript, and then he's going to send it out to 2 or 3 anonymous reviewers. These are prominent people in the field. Maybe you suggested them, maybe you didn't. And they're going to read it, and then they're going to tell the editor whether to publish it. And if they're going to publish it, what needs to be changed to make this an adequate book. If the editor decides that they're positive enough, the editor will send you a letter outlining the changes that you need to make, and then asking you for a deadline. If you get a contract, it's going to have a deadline in there when you have to give that manuscript back to the editor with changes. The editor is not obligated to publish your manuscript unless you deliver on time and with all the changes required. And then the editor still isn't obligated, actually. They could still pull out. So contract is not as awesome as it sounds, but it is an important first step. The really important thing is that you do everything you promise to do. If you promise to meet a deadline, meet it. If you promise to make certain changes, make them. A good slogan to follow is the reviewers are always right. Even when they're wrong, they're still right. If you think they're wrong about your book, you need to go back and revise those sections to make it more clear what you're saying. And if you think if they say that you need to engage with a certain area of scholarship, that means you need to engage with that area of scholarship. You need to add it into your footnotes. You need to add the analysis in and that. If they see you need to rearrange your chapters, that means you need to rearrange your chapters. Treat those reviewers who are paid by the publisher as your research assistants. They're being paid to help find mistakes in your work. Take it very seriously. They're doing you a massive favor, and you don't pay for it. The editor pays for it. The publisher pays for it. So it's a big help, and treat it that way. Final bit of advice. It can be a discouraging process. You get rejections are part of the process. There's a very famous passage from Stephen Pressfield, the famous fiction author. And when he started to get his books manuscripts reviewed by publishers, he was getting rejected and he was getting criticized, and the editors were telling him what was wrong with him, and he was complaining about it to a friend. And the friend said, "What are you complaining about? You're an author who's having your books reviewed by editors and publishers. Isn't this what you wanted?" And that's exactly right. As a scholar, we want our books to be taken seriously by editors, by other scholars, which means they get criticized. And sometimes the criticisms feel unfair, but that's just part of the process. So if you get those criticisms, it means you're making it, and you should be happy about that.
Thank you. That was very clear and forcefully stated. Does anyone want to add on to anything about the book proposal process or editing before we mosey on ahead? I'll throw the next question to Robinson, if you're prepared to talk about the actual, supposing that it's published and then you need to get people to buy it, how you market the book. I know for a fact that you are an engaging and active Twitter user, for example. I don't know if that's an important element of the process, but is there anything you could tell us about it?
Sure. I have some thoughts about Twitter, but I'll save them for the end because I'm not sure they're particularly profound. So It might be that you wrote a book to get a job or to get tenure in the job you have, but you might want someone besides, say, your parents or friends to read it, which is a reasonable goal. How do you do that? Some of this actually begins in the process of pitching your book to the press. And so we'll talk about how to publicize your book through the press and stuff you can do outside of the press. One of your goals in simply, in writing the book and drafting the book proposal is thinking about the audience. And if you can demonstrate to the press that your book will be of interest to a wider audience, then you can make a better case for the press to price that book lower. When you think about sort of negotiating for a contract, if you can put the book at a lower price, you can get more places to carry it. And it makes it more plausible for you to, say, arrange book talks through bookstores. And to have a broader circulation for your book. Now, it could be, again, that you're simply using this book to get tenure. I have a friend, for example, who published a book through Cambridge. He was happy with the process. The book was, I think, listed at $110, and he got tenure out of it. If you are, say, more interested in having a wider audience, then negotiating in your contract for a $30 or $35 initial sort of price can be important. And again, part of demonstrating or part of getting that price is just demonstrating that the book can plausibly sell and that you've written a book for a wider audience. Working outside of the press, there are sort of a few directions you can go. One is trying to directly set up book reviews, pitching your book to journals that are of interest to scholars working in your field. You can also do this with the press. Presses will often have a publicist, and that's someone you'll want to get to know a few months before your book's publication date to arrange these book reviews. But you don't have to do it through a publicist. And some publicists will be more involved helping you set up book events, some less. Again, this is sort of about the impression that the press has of your book and its interest to the public. Again, you can go outside of the press to do these things. Finally, there is social media. Some people use Facebook, some people use Twitter. I know Instagram and TikTok are out there, but I don't know what's happening on them. In terms of Twitter, I'll speak mainly to that since that's the part I know best. There are sort of a few types of ways people publicize their books. Sometimes they'll explain, they'll note when they got a contract, they'll note when they got a cover, things like that. But I think the most often or most useful, frequently used sort of way of publicizing a book on Twitter is a simple tweet thread in which you list the main points of your book. Often, things like graphs are helpful for people scrolling through. And that can sort of help you get more engagement, like say setting up your book for reviews. Or also one last thing I wanted to mention, podcasts. So there are disciplinary podcasts, and if you listen to them, you can sort of reach out to those people and say, hey, I've got a new book, happy to do an episode. They're short, they're sweet, and they're a good way to kind of, again, get your book out there. And that's something you can do without the press's help. One sort of final note, I want to plug two books, neither of which is mine. William Germano's book, From Dissertation to Book, very helpful. It'll list every stage of the process from to flip your dissertation into a book. It's been used for decades. It's really cheap. You can get it online as well. And it's like 100 pages, and it kind of just walks you through every step of what we said. The other book, Strunk and White, Elements of Style, it's still a good book. If you haven't read it, read it. And that'll kind of remind you that you're actually writing something that's meant to be read, even if, only a handful of people are going to read it, or if many people are going to read it, you still want it to be readable. So those are two books that I wanted to mention. And those are my only thoughts on publicizing a book.
Excellent thoughts.
Let me add another book by William Germano. This is the second book, Getting It Published, which is also helpful in terms of this process as well. So William Germano, he's a useful resource for these sorts of conversations.
Another way to sell books is to get strangers to hold up your book on webinars. So I've got a sort of, oh, there's one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just received this in the mail. Yeah.
I was wondering who had bought it.
Oh, I know you did because it's displayed prominently behind you over your right shoulder. Yes.
Ah, there we are. Well done. Natasha, I have a sort of open-ended question. I have a narrow question too, but let's begin with the open-ended one about, if you have any thoughts on pitfalls involved in the process as a whole. let us know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what not to do. The first thing is probably rather general, and we've heard it often, but I would not be so severe with your project. So allow for flexibility. You actually don't have to deliver exactly what was promised in the proposal. Oftentimes you won't, because you'll go through a whole new process of self-discovery, of insights from that proposal stage. Even if your dissertation is perfect as a dissertation, you're going to encounter new epiphanies when you start writing your monograph, or in my case, an edited volume. So in my case, I was asked to translate a lot of unpublished works by Francesco Guicciardini, and that seemed like a promising project. But as I was translating, I also TA'd at the time in a lot of Renaissance classes, and I noticed that there was a demand for an edited volume that put all of these political texts together, because otherwise people were just downloading random versions, and there was really a need for this kind of a volume. And so in the process, I switched the topic of the book from a pure translation of Francesco Guicciardini's writings to a more composite, edited volume containing the key text of Florentine political writings from Petrarch to Machiavelli. And that was actually important because I could assess that there was a need, there was demand, and it was, it helped my publisher because it's been selling. Classrooms have been using this book as opposed to downloading various PDFs of various translations, and it's become the standard for what you assign when you're teaching the Renaissance. And so I think that you have to allow yourself that flexibility. I was so worried about how they were going to take this proposition, or whether that was even allowed, since I had already had a contract to do this translation. But the publisher is your friend. They want to sell the most books, and they trust that you are the expert in that. They know that you have the best sense of what kind of demand is out there at the graduate level, at the undergraduate level. So make sure you keep an open line of communication. Don't feel like you need to have everything perfect before you ask a question. Make sure that you have open lines of communication so that you can throw these ideas out there, discuss possibilities for taking a new direction, because oftentimes your instincts will are pretty much spot on in that sense. So I would just allow for the greatest flexibility possible, and don't feel constrained by the proposal that you initially sent in. I mean, obviously it's a good outline and you should try to follow it, but sometimes things happen which makes you think that there will be greater demand if you pivot in a certain direction. So tangentially related to that is that you should always ask for help, even if you're not writing an edited volume, even when you're writing your own monograph. I know that we as political scientists are in a book field where we tend to write our own monographs, especially in political theory. Maybe that's not true in all of political science, but political theory especially. So it makes you feel like it's your own thing and you can't ask for help, but that's certainly not the case. Not only is a publisher your friend and your editor your friend, but people want to help you. And even if you have discrete questions on specific issues of your book topic, you should reach out to people in the field, because chances are they're interested and they want to know what you're working on if your interests do happen to align. So I always felt like I couldn't ask because I didn't know this person, or this scholar was too important or too big of a Renaissance scholar for me to trifle him with some small question. But in fact, it usually happens that they're interested, they love this stuff, and they want to know, and they want to be a part of the process. And it's okay to ask for help, even if it's your own monograph. Shall I stop there if you want to talk about, if you want anyone else to jump in? Or?
Yeah. We have a question that was sent in by email earlier, and we have a couple of questions that have been sent in now, but if anyone wants to follow up on that before we turn to those questions.
I can follow up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I want to echo Natasha's point about the flexibility of your project, because inevitably, right, there will be shifts in perspective, a newly discovered speech, a different perspective you didn't think about before. And so I think it's a sign of strength when you take that new information into account and your manuscript does evolve. And that leads me to another point. Editors, what I've heard is that editors, most don't have time to read each word of your manuscript that you send in. They'll read, right, the introduction, conclusion, maybe a central chapter, most important subject in your book, which underscores the importance of making sure that intro and conclusion is strong, clear, lures the reader in, elucidates the trajectory of your argument. And that intro and conclusion, back to my point about the flexibility, that for me, that constantly change over time, a modification here, modification there, as you glean new insights and you bring in new material to your manuscript. And so don't be afraid. In fact, I encourage you to go back to intro and conclusion and consistently update it, refine it, strengthen it, because those are the sections that your editor will read most likely will read when you send the manuscript to them, and those are the first sections that your readers will most likely read. Right, a decent number of our readers probably did not read our entire books, but they probably most likely read the intro, maybe a conclusion. Tom's looking like he didn't read anything in my book, and maybe a couple of key chapters that touch on commonly or common topics from the reader's perspective. So make sure you hone in and you sharpen those sections of your book in particular before you send the manuscript out.
Any follow-up? So I've got a couple of questions, more questions I'll throw to everybody, and you can claim it for yourself. So we had a question emailed in by Catherine Robiadek, who's assistant professor at Hood College. And she asked, are there pros or cons to a book workshop? At what point in the publication process should a workshop take place? So anyone have a thought on that question?
Look, I haven't had a book manuscript workshop, but I think on the whole, they seem rather helpful. And if you have the opportunity to organize one for yourself, I would say, why not? Luke Robinson or Gregory might want to speak more on this in terms of their experience with monographs, but I always think that more eyes on your chapters, the better. And therefore, in addition to presenting those chapters in modified format, our annual conferences or your subfields conference, it's wise to get as many eyes on it as possible. And it's not only beneficial for you, but it gets more eyes on the book and more anticipation drummed up for its eventual publication. So my view is, if you have the opportunity, why not? That being said, I did not do that in my own manuscript. So I'd like to hear what Luke or Robinson or Gregory have to say about that.
I did have a book workshop. Luke or Robinson, did you have a book workshop for your?
I did not. I could speak to, I would say it's a great idea for the reasons Natasha said. I do plan on doing it with my next book. And the reason is that you can, when you get rejected from a publisher, the reasons that the reviewers might give is, well, that the scholar didn't even cover, this whole topic, it's not even worth going forward with this manuscript. So not, hey, add a chapter, cover it there, but just, well, it's not worth it. And they'll send the rejection. But a workshop is going to catch all of that. The readers in your workshop will catch all of that. So you get kind of the anonymous review process, you get past that risky stage where you might have really missed something. That will not be true once your book has been revised after the workshop. So you'll get those experts in the room and get their feedback. So I didn't have a workshop on my book, but I participated in them. And they were incredibly helpful. If it's your first book, or even your first couple of books, it probably should take place before the proposal process. The ones I participated in that were after the proposal process, it was with senior scholars who could get their proposals accepted with just a 40-page manuscript, kind of promising the full manuscript, because they were Cambridge University Press could know that this person was going to deliver a good product. So do it if you have the opportunity, and do it early.
Any more on that question? I'll move to the next one. Okay,
I have
so
one thought.
Oh, go ahead.
Short of a book conference, you can always send chapters to friends, and it can achieve a similar effect for free, with the sort of understanding that perhaps you owe those friends a debt to read their chapters. It's something that I did in lieu of a book conference, and I think it preempted some objections that reviewers might have had. And it also gave me a little bit of flexibility in that, I was able to send certain chapters to certain people given their expertise. So there are alternatives to book conferences that can achieve a similar goal, I guess.
And it always helps for people to catch, typos and errors in the manuscript. And it also, for me, it's helpful when you give your work to someone who's not in your field, the educated layperson, right? Because they may look, point to a section and say, hey, this isn't necessarily clear. Even, I mean, we've all experienced this, it's clear to you, but it's clear to no one else. And so that prompts you to revise that particular section, which makes that section clearer for the educated reader of your book.
I also have a thought on that. I was surprised by the lack of copy editing from my press, not because my press is bad, my press is wonderful, Pen Press, I'm so happy to have published this book there, but I think it's the general case that you're kind of expected to do that for your books. And it's not like someone's doing it for you, particularly in edited volumes where you have to create a lot of consistency between different texts, but also in your monographs, in my experience, you're your own editor in that regard. There's no other senior person who's just going to magically edit it for you. So sending it to friends, participating in book workshops, sending your papers to conferences, like that, those are all ways that diminish the amount of work you're gonna have to do in the end when you're attending to those kinds of things throughout the process.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next question. This is from Luke Perez, and I suspect it's oriented towards some of the things that Luke Sheahan was saying, but anyone can jump in, obviously. He says, when you send out the proposal to the top 10, is it better to write them all up and send out all 10 out on the same day, or send them out in clusters as you finish? I know it's common to send out the proposal to multiple publishers simultaneously, unlike journal articles, but since writing 10 unique cover letters could take time, I'm wondering how best to manage the sending out phase. So some logistical question for some of what you had said.
Yeah, send them out when you get them done. Kind of the sooner the better. So if you're taking a week, and yes, you are right, it does take a lot of time to get those right. Send them out as you get them done over the course of a week or whatever. And that way it also, if you give yourself the arbitrary deadline of, you're going to send them all 10 out at once, you might make the error of sending, Oxford's letter to Cambridge or something like that, which wouldn't be helpful. So you can take your time on this and spread it out to make sure that, maybe a goal of 2 a day, you're going to make sure you get your email addresses right and that MIT or Oxford is getting the right letter and addressing the right book series with the appropriate press and all of that. So yeah, as you go logistically, and also whatever you can do to check off boxes and give yourself a little dopamine hit of having something done can be really helpful. So when you send out that first letter, it feels really good. And then you have the kind of impetus to keep sending more out as you go. And some of the you'll get sometimes immediate rejections. So the editor's literally checking his email when it comes in, reads your cover letter, decides it's not a good fit just based on the cover letter, and you get a rejection right there. So sometimes the responses can be really quick, and sometimes they can take months to just even get their proposal read. And that can be for various reasons. Sometimes it's because the editor is consulting with colleagues over it. Sometimes it's because there's actually a gap in employment. So with Kansas, there was actually a gap as they got a new acquisition editor. So I thought it had disappeared into cyberspace or something, and then got a positive response when the new editor came on. So there can be all sorts of things going on in the back end. But yeah, whatever works logistically and whatever you can do to give yourself the dopamine hit as these tasks get marked off can be helpful.
I just want to add to that you might want to make sure with each press that they're comfortable with you sending out your proposals to multiple presses, and that's usually clear on their websites whether they allow that or not. Some, and most obviously do, but some are more particular in that regard. So it's always good to double check that you're staying within the stated rules that the each particular press has. The other thing on dopamine hits and productivity, I find that making a Gmail folder or an Outlook folder for your book and putting all of those emails that pertain to it in that folder, not everyone does this, but it's actually a nice way not just to organize, but to overlook how much progress you've made and keep track of the trajectory when you're feeling low in those moments of rejection and hardship. And it's not that hard to do. So.
Yeah, and I should say, no publisher that I'm aware of permits you to have the book under review at another publisher. So if they request your manuscript and they're going to send it out to reviewers, that means they're going to pay people to review it, and they don't want it out anywhere else. Sometimes, and they'll often explicitly ask that and say, "Is this under review elsewhere?" Because they will not send it out for review if it's under review elsewhere. So don't say, if somebody requests a review and you send it, you don't send you can stop sending out their proposals and do not agree to send it out anywhere else with any other publisher.
So let me ask the other panelists, did you cold email or cold send these letters out to your editors at the presses, or did you have someone introduce yourself, your dissertation advisor, senior colleague? Because I've been asked this question myself, and from my experience, I just sent cold emails out to different editors.
Yeah, for me, it was cold emails.
I actually presented at a conference a paper that summarized, it was a sort of like a précis of my dissertation, and there was a representative from the press in the audience who then followed up with me, and that's how the process got started. So I really urge all junior scholars to present often, because that would have never happened had he not been in the audience and had I not, chosen to present that paper. I usually didn't like to present that paper and would have rather presented, more focused works instead of a summary of my project, but I'm so happy I did. So it's just a reminder that presenting at conferences isn't only good for networking or for getting other eyes on your book chapters. They're also great because the major press publishers attend and they want to talk to you and they want to meet you, and they only can do that if they know what you're working on.
One other thought, first sort of on setting up contact with presses and then at the actual process of contact. You can always cold email or contact. It does help if you can contact through someone who's worked with that press. So if you have an advisor or committee member who knows an acquisition editor at that press, having that person vet for you can help a little bit. This is not a double-blinded peer review process. And that means that sort of working existing connections is part of the process. In terms of contacting the process, you can do it by email. APSA has a big book exhibit room, as I'm sure you all know, and that's a place where you can meet with acquisition editors in person and pitch your book in ways that might not be possible through the book proposal, and sort of elaborate some things that were done through the proposal. Also, remember, your acquisition editor is a person who's going to be a champion for your book. They might help you write your second book, and so you're also sort of establishing a relationship, and it's helpful to sort of meet that person, if not, in person, then maybe on the phone or through Zoom as well. So those are sort of two things to think about. Again, first contacting presses through someone that and then maybe, if you can, contacting your acquisition editor for a longer conversation beyond the book proposal.
Yeah, I think it only helps if you are able to have a face-to-face meeting with your editor. So don't be afraid. From my experience, I sent an email out. I said, "Hey, I'll be at this upcoming political science conference. Would you have time to meet?" And so we sort of set up an informal meeting. I mean, these editors are very busy, themselves, but I did have your 2-minute meeting with the editor, and I gave him tried to sell some of my book project, and so. Make sure you do have your 30-second speech down, your 2-minute speech down on convincing possible editors why your book should be invested in. Because oftentimes you won't have much more time to do so. In my case, I didn't have more time because he scheduled me informally between formal meetings with other more established scholars. So we literally sat down. He said, "Okay, tell me about your book." And 2 minutes later, we shook hands and I left. And so, so I encourage you to try to, even if it's informal and short like that, to try to put a face to a name.
I know we're all hesitant to do so, but I just want to reiterate, you should email those editors that you want to meet at the conferences, and you should stop by the book exhibitions as well and introduce yourself, even if you aren't able to get a meeting. It's not personal, it's usually that they're busy, and them seeing your face will help. You'll maybe be able to pitch your book, or you'll start a conversation, but it's both of those things are fruitful and it's never too much.
Yeah, I'd reiterate that. Email in August to set up a meeting for September at APSA. I tried to email the day or two before APSA an editor at Oxford, who I then walked up to, and he was exhausted because there were dozens of junior scholars who wanted jobs or tenure. And I don't think he had the time for my 30-second pitch or the headspace for it. So email in advance, maybe a couple weeks before the conference to make sure you get one of those valuable slots in the book room if you're going to do it in person.
Great. We've got another question here. If you want to ask a question, again, I encourage you to use the Q&A feature. So this is a question, I'll read it out. And hopefully you guys have something interesting to say about it. It says, I'm completing my PhD this year and taking a non-academic job. I am very eager to publish my dissertation as a book and want to know some challenges might be for publishing this sort of book despite being out of academia. My PhD is on a topic of interest to the general public, namely the history of anti-globalist populism in the American far right. And I am unsure of whether I would be better off trying to publish it with a university press or popular press. Any thoughts on that particular situation? Or I might emphasize the last one. Have you guys ever thought about what it would mean to publish in the popular press rather than a university press? So open to anybody.
I think we all did university presses here, didn't we?
Right, yeah.
I mean, if for the questioner, if your job is not in academia itself, if it's not for an organization like JMC or a similar academic-oriented institution, my initial reaction, but I'm interested to hear other panelists' thoughts, is that would it even matter ultimately whether you publish with the academic press as opposed to a trade press? With the academic press, you get more prestige, right, if you're on the tenure track line. But if you're not on that line and you're in, let's say, the private sector, does that enhance your prestige if you publish with an academic press versus a trade press? Maybe not. And if you publish with a trade press, perhaps you garner more copies sold of your book. That's my first initial thought on that question.
Yeah, I agree with Greg. I don't know that it'd help you to have a university press, and you might run into the problem of, even if you could get there, they do the thing to you where they charge $110 for your book, and it's a little difficult to garner attention for it. But there are trade presses with kind of academic wings, and so they're interested in more intellectually engaging or deep books. So you might have a lot of luck there. And looking kind of the academic wing of trade presses. So take a look at your bookshelf, see what books you're reading and what those publishers are that are not university presses, and see what would be a good fit for it. But I think that would be the best route. And that's something probably I may do, in 10 or 15 years, is go with a trade press if there's some topic that I'm writing on at that time that I think should be read by a broader audience. And I think actually university press might not be the best fit for it, even though it's an academic-like book. And so that happens. One of my colleagues did that recently at Duquesne. Brad Thompson published recently with Encounter very successfully, as it turned out. And of course, he's a very serious scholar, so it just made sense to put that book out more in the public realm, and it worked. He got a lot more sales off of it, I think, than he would have if it had been even at a university press that sold it for a decent price. So I definitely go that route, I think, if I were you.
I think there are a lot of presses that occupy that liminal space between academic and trade, like Routledge. They publish both, actually, and they're very well respected. They have very prestigious press and with a long history that, you know, isn't necessarily categorizable by many, or we don't think it's categorizable. I also think it depends on the political commitments of the book. Sometimes presses like Verso are open to different kinds of books that aren't necessarily academic books. But that would depend on the content. So you might want to explore avenues that pertain to your topic.
We're running out of time. I wanted to leave a little bit of time for you all to have any final thoughts, or even if it's just to reiterate something that you want to stick in the listeners or the audience's mind before we head out. So feel free to jump in.
Well, I'd like to reiterate what I said at the beginning. Do not be discouraged. Don't let yourself get down, because it can be a discouraging process. If you focus on the negatives, you will get rejections, almost certainly. And that's all right. That's all of us have gotten rejections. Your dissertation advisor got rejections. The great scholars that you look up to, that you cite, they got rejections too, especially early in their career, before they made their names. So just take that as part of the process and kind of embrace the process. You get criticized, you get rejected, you revise, you resubmit, and you do that over and over again for decades. So just embrace that process. It's not like term papers or your dissertation where you complete it, you submit it, and then you're done. It's the revise and resubmit process. You're now in that process for the rest of your life, and so embrace it. And like I said, when you get those rejections or those criticisms or the significant revisions that you have to do and you thought you were done, that means you made it. And you should be actually thrilled. Like Stephen Pressfield, he's getting rejected. That means he was actually making it as a novelist. It wasn't the reason to get discouraged.
Any other final words?
Just a couple picked up pieces here and there that I didn't mention earlier.
Yeah, go ahead.
One, do think carefully about the title of your book, your provisional title, when you send the manuscript off. It should convey what you are writing about and entice the reader in some way. The trend these days, the sense I get, is that there's a focus on keyword search titles because of the proliferation of searching for books online. And so, my book, Commerce and Manners, Edmund Burke's Political Economy. Well, there you go, Commerce, Manners, Edmund Burke, Political Economy. And it may be a little different for the humanities where you want a more flowery title. But think carefully about the title, because editors will look at the title, and that does convey something about the product that you're sending to the editor. And then you can have a give and take with the editor about the appropriate the final title. When writing the book, be aware of the methodology. You don't want to get into the weeds of methodology as opposed to dissertation, but make sure that it reflects the general expectations of your discipline. For us, I think all of us, political theory, political thought field, there's an emphasis on theory. And so you have to make judgment calls about how much, for at least in my case, how much history you want to put in, historical context you want to put into the project. You don't want to overwhelm it, but you also don't want to completely dismiss those areas, because your book, hopefully will be read by scholars outside of your discipline, such as historians. And so one pattern that I've experienced is that historians, they've made comments about sort of the historical context of my book. And so be aware of the methodological concerns and expectations when you do write the book, without going into these internecine debates amongst 20 scholars within your field. So strike that necessary balance. It's also helpful to just look at different books in your area and see how much history they put in, how much theory they put in, how much quantitative data they put in as sort of a point of departure for your own project.
This is very specific advice, but I found it paradigm shifting. A part of the book proposal, as Luke mentioned, is that they want you to identify other books that are comparable to yours on the market. And I think that even before the proposal stage, it's useful to be thinking along those lines. Even while you're developing your manuscript, if you have an idea of someone's book that is parallel to yours in some way, open it up time and again, look at who published it, reread it, think about how your audience is distinct from that one, because it helps motivate the project, it helps keep the steam going, and it's just an example of a finished product that I think provided me important moments of inspiration. So I would recommend that.
Any final words? Otherwise, I'm going to thank everyone so much for attending. Gregory Collins, Luke Sheahan, Natasha Piano, Robinson, Woodward-Burns. I also want to thank all the attendees and people that sent in questions. I'm sure this was helpful to some of you and to others that are watching later on the internet. So again, thank you so much for spending time helping our friends out. Bye.